I haven't actually been to this meeting before. It's kind of interesting. Despite the grandiose title of Chief Technology Officer, I just want to, for full disclosure, say I've only been in that role for 3 months. So I don't know much about FHIR as Jeff does, for example. So if you have technical questions, we'll ask for others to provide it. Actually, the invitation was originally extended to Chuck Jaffe, the CEO of HL7, who's been out on the podium circuit with FHIR for many, many years. And Chuck called me and he said, "Oh, I'm going to be in Italy with my wife for my first vacation in 3 years. Can you come and take over for me so that we have a presence? Or I feel so bad. I like this conference. Our headquarters is in Ann Arbor. We never get here." And so I said, "Well, sure." So you guys got the understudy today. I do actually, let's see, where are we? There we go. So we're going to talk well, we actually did take some of Chuck's slides. Actually, what I've done, coming in cold, I actually did not live in the HL7 world for the last 20 years like some people did. I came in from the pharmaceutical industry, and coincidentally, I was involved in HL7, but only peripherally as sort of an observer. And actually, even more coincidentally, I was at that presentation when Graham Greene first introduced this from the Fresh Look Task Force back in 2011. But other than that, I really didn't know a whole lot more about FHIR other than how to spell it and pronounce it, as Jeff noted. So I have a slightly different perspective. I'm going to include some of the basic stump speech slides about FHIR, which were based on material that Chuck did, and I've taken some others from Mickey Tripathi and a few others. And I've condensed them because I've actually been talking about FHIR to my former constituency in the biopharm industry, which knows absolutely nothing at all about it, and it's been an interesting experience. So I have this sort of alienated observer position, watching what's going on, as well as having a fairly significant position in that I am sort of Graham's bulldozer trying to get him past organizational hurdles to keep things moving along. So I've had a very interesting perspective working with the core team. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the peripheral organizations, how people are involved in FHIR, and not so much about the details of what it is, because you've got lots of other people to cover that. So I'll give a little bit of my overview of FHIR, which is a very clean, short, sweet, easy, that doesn't get into the depth stuff a little bit, and I'll skim over a few things that Jeff covered. And talk quite a bit more about Argonaut, because I think that's one of the many unique features about the FHIR experience. And a little bit, even less, about a few other things going on, but I think there are other people here who can talk about connectathons and clinicians on FHIR. And one of the most interesting things about FHIR is that new things are springing up every day. So as we go through these things, you'll see them. I just saw the health data information today. There's another big thing saying, vendors ready to adopt FHIR. Well, we'll see. But the point is that it seems every day there's a new piece coming in the news. It's as Jeff said, catching on fire. I've never seen anything like that coming from a standards environment in a different industry. I'm not sure anyone else has either. So I always start my talk with just a review of why I joined HL7 and why we're here. And it starts out with the vision and mission statement. And the vision is basically a world where everyone has the information they need securely when and where they need it. And you've heard a lot of presentations, I'm sure, the last couple days sort of expressing this. And the mission is for HL7 to develop, I insert the blue stuff, the best right standards to make all of that possible. And again, what I see in FHIR is a mechanism, a path forward to accomplish all of these things. And while there's been lots of good work done in the past, none of it really has had the potential and this type of energy and excitement about it. There's not a whole lot exciting about the world of data standards. Let's be realistic. But FHIR is different. It really does arouse interest and passion. Oops, go back one. And this slide I copied from a survey that HIMSS did, an online survey, and at HIMSS 2016, and I think FHIR had basically more interest than just about every other topic put together. So you see that happening a lot. And this is in the HIMSS world, and it's coming from all over the floor. There were a number of FHIR-based presentations at the HL7 booth. They were packed, and there were a lot of presentations there. You'll see more of that. This slide, you've all seen this one before, Metcalfes Law, and Chuck often puts a lot of quotes in his slides. I have my own quotes, but I didn't put them in for this one to keep it short. But the quote is that, a standard isn't used because someone creates it. It's because people use it. A standard becomes useful because people use it. And that's what we're seeing with FHIR. It's not about something that's been dictated from a standards organization. It's about something that's been intuitively adopted. And as you see, the value, it all depends upon who's using it. It seems that we have thousands of users already in the FHIR community for something that's relatively new. It's a recent survey that was done from the class group that measures conformance, and here's yet another example of FHIR far away leading the loop. I didn't include the Gartner hype cycle that Jeff did, but there is a lot of that, the concern of when are we going to go over the top of that roller coaster heap and into that trough of disillusionment. I'm not sure it's going to be that steep a drop in this case, because it's not. It seems that every time we take another step, FHIR seems to be up to the task. The things that we're struggling with is how to define and resolve certain ways of applying it, but it's not the technology at all. And so, we're going to see, as more and more people adopt it, sure, people are going to stumble here and there probably as they learn there and feel their way around. But I don't really see that trough happening very much. It's picking up quite a bit. And here's, you've seen a lot from Drs. DeSalvo this week about ONC's kind of really pretty explicit dependence on the use of FHIR to provide this patient-facing API that was specified for the next phase of meaningful use for certified vendors to have to provide. And this is what we've seen as we talk about Argonaut. Yeah, they got it, they recognize it, they're doing it right now. Sync for Science is another really interesting project that the NIH is sponsoring. There's our friend Josh Mandel at the bottom over there, who's, I took out my slides on Smart on FHIR because I thought there was another presentation, but the Smart on FHIR stuff is extremely interesting in terms of what Josh has done at Harvard Medical School in having, I think there are probably around 50 applications already available using FHIR that are open source that people can download and adapt. And we've had a number of indications, other cases where people have actually put them into production already. So no, it's not normative, not yet. And I'll talk a little more a little later about it. But it's well already embedded within operations throughout the industry. And what's interesting about Sync for Science is that this goal of getting 1 million patients to essentially donate their healthcare data for research purposes is really another unprecedented thing. People are going to basically buy into this, and we're going to use, and FHIR is going to be the backbone. It's going to make it possible for people to authorize, share their information, and probably do a great deal to improve the state of research. Chuck Friedman had better slides on the learning health system. But again, if you talk about what he was trying to achieve the learning health system, it's all about learning at the point of care, passing that information back into an accessible knowledge repository, and there really isn't a better way to organize that than FHIR that I can see. So we'll be seeing a lot more of that as FHIR becomes more deeply embedded within the HR systems around the US and the world eventually. So, some basics of FHIR. Again, I'll do this very quickly. Jeff kind of covered it. But I've kind of distilled it again for a very non-aware audience who hasn't been living in the world of healthcare. Within the world of biopharma research, even though the research on clinical trials of new drug therapies is based entirely on healthcare data, they don't use healthcare data historically. They use their own forms that they collect data, which is already there, and it's been a real problem for ages. And so I've had a personal crusade trying to get them, you guys need to buy into this too. So what is FHIR? It's described as a platform and a framework more than a standard. It's more than just a standard. It's not just a way of representing information. It's a way of working with information. And it does build on the 30 years experience that HL7 had through all those progressions that Jeff mentioned, V2, V3, and multiple other activities along the way to basically put together a solution that fits with modern technologies. And the other key thing in that first bullet is design for implementation. FHIR that was one of the perceived weaknesses of the V3 method. It was a model-based approach that was worked really well in terms of trying to defining the world, but it was very difficult for many people to implement and put in production. FHIR basically spun that over on its head and say, let's start out by saying, what can we really implement? Jeff talked about RESTful services, which is all over the internet and what's driving a lot of the applications that run on our phones as well as our browsers. The fact that, as he said, the information is the same, but you can present it in multiple ways, as messages, as documents, as services. And lastly, it's all based on these core resource information components. These are the atoms that are used to build the world of FHIR for interchanging information. And I think you covered many of these, but not all. These principles I've extracted and put together, but they're mine, they're not official. I think this first one's really important. Data resides at a single source of truth. That's very important, again, for me in the world of pharma, that instead of making infinite copies of things, you use services to access the single source of truth and reuse it in multiple purposes. Pull what you need instead of only getting what's pushed. That's kind of the difference from the CCDA approach. CCDA, dump everything about a patient. Would it be easier if a physician really doesn't want to look necessarily through a 100-page document? They want to ask a question, get a simple answer. Focus on implementers, mentioned that. Including rigorous semantics. That's an ongoing activity. The semantics are probably the most challenging part of data standards. And FHIR, with its ability to be human readable, actually has had some advantages of exposing the underlying structures more to the clinicians, and really, I think, helped improve the dialogue in terms of as we work through the difficulties of becoming more precision semantics, which are really one of the keys to interoperability. This 80-20 rule is really, really important, and the FHIR team rigorously supports that. What that means is you focus on the things that almost everyone's going to need. It doesn't mean that other things aren't important, but that's why you have an extension structure. The thing is, historically, people often get caught up with the edge case. My specific need is going to take this complex solution, and that hangs things up. And they're trying to avoid that. They're saying, yep, I get your need. It's important. Put it in an extension. We're going to focus on something that everyone can use, and that's what's helping it move so quickly. Off-the-shelf security and authorization, Jeff mentioned that with OAuth. Speed, scalability, ease of understanding. Things happen at a ridiculously fast rate, and what's amazing in the community is people interact with the community around the world. Questions are posed, answers are coming back at well, it's the social media world, but the fact is people around the world pick up when there's a question. And the richness of the community, again, is something I haven't seen before in this type of environment. And of course, everything can be read, and it's free. What could be better than that? Jeff showed some of the resources. I thought this was interesting. Josh Mandel did a survey of the FHIR community back in May, probably late April, May, and asked the community to essentially rate which were the priority resources. And this is the list that came back. It's not exactly the same list as the meaningful use core elements, which is interesting. But there's about 100-odd resources currently in the FHIR standard. There's about 20 or so here, which everyone recognizes are the key ones. Keep an eye on this, because that's a pretty good look. There'll be a good conformance between this and the first normative edition. These will be the resources we try to lock down first. And you should recognize most of these, and a lot of them are basically meaningful use, but there's a few others that are different, like conformance. Last part of my overview here is the maturity model, which is a really, really important part. It's true that we're still in a standard for trial use. The third standard for trial use will be coming out shortly, probably the last before first normative. But the FHIR maturity model really allows people to work with what's there now with a state of confidence. And so what the maturity model does is it is applied to resources, it's applied to profiles as well. And the notion of what it is basically, you start out with maturity. Actually, maturity level 0 is just a draft. Somebody throws something out for comment. Level 1 is that you have a stable build that's incorporated within the FHIR build that's updated. Level 2 is that it has passed and been used successfully in a connectathon. I'll talk a little bit about connectathons later. But this is a way that essentially multiple organizations have applied this resource consistently and successfully. 3 is a ballot. Once it gets through an SDU ballot and is passed by that, that achieves level 3. 4 means tested, published, prototypes are in existence, and 5 is international adoption, multiple countries, multiple organizations. We haven't gotten anything to level 5 or even level 4 at this point, but there's a lot of things that are already at level 3. And you can see this by just going to the FHIR website and taking a look at every resource that's there. So you always know what the state is. Another one of the beauties about FHIR is that, since it is so well documented, self-describing, as Jeff said, it's not a big deal when resources change. When they change, it's not what tends to change from what I have observed are refinements in the definitions, and sometimes an additional attribute or two are taken or added to the resource or modified somewhat. But these are easy things to address within the RESTful framework in terms of programming. It doesn't really scare people. It's not as challenging as it is with lots of other environments. And so what's nice about the maturity model, even when we go normative, FHIR's not going to be done. It's not going to stop changing. It's going to have a stable core that we don't expect to touch anymore for a while. But there'll be other resources added. There'll be other profiles added over time. And so the maturity model is a real good way of understanding how ready is this for real use. All right, let's move on into JSON, the JSON task force. And many of these slides I adapted from Mickey Tripathi, who's been also on the Stump circuit doing this for quite some time. The Argonaut project that came out from this original JSON task force, and again, I wasn't in the world of healthcare so much, but reality is when meaningful use came out, the regulations were imposed probably before the world was ready to implement them. And I think that was just a general conclusion that people had. And this was somewhat a reaction to this. Let's say, let's do it differently next time. So with this clear requirement that ONC put for a patient-facing API that will expose healthcare authorized with authorization, healthcare data to appropriate users, for example, the use case so that a patient can get all the information about their health record from multiple different providers, which are often buried in portals. Let's try to get industry working cooperatively with providers to make sure we do it in a way that can actually be implemented and implemented consistently. And so basically the private sector working with the public sector to collaboratively, it's more than testing, evaluate, assess, implement iteratively the requirements that will be in place with enough time to get them ready so that we're able to deliver a quality, consistent product. And that's what the general motivation was behind Argonaut. I think there were 89 participants. That number's increased, and I just got a few new pharma to join in yesterday or Wednesday. So numbers are always going up. And it's a mixture of EHR vendors, of healthcare providers, of service providers like Accenture. But you know, it's actually a pretty impressive list. And these are kind of the core founding members for the most part. But there's a lot more involved. If you go look at the list of 90-something, I think you'll see pretty much just about every well-known EHR vendor there and a number of other large provider organizations and even payer organizations are getting involved at this point. And so a lot of groups involved, all working together. Jeff's Goldilocks slide was better than this. This is kind of Mickey's slide, same sort of thing. What was wrong with the old ones? Too small, too big, too hard. And FHIR was designed to address all of those. So what is the point of the Argonaut project? Well, it was built not to be something different entirely. It was going to work on the activities of other groups. Yes, the HL7 FHIR development community, also the ONC S&I framework, being build up on what that was trying to do, work within that framework for the most part, and the SMART initiative from led by Josh Mandel of Harvard Medical School, which has been building specific patient-focused applications on the FHIR infrastructure to work with healthcare data and to do a number of interesting things with that. The idea was to let's work with FHIR before it's there to make sure it's mature enough for us to be able to use it consistently. And so getting providers working with vendors and the FHIR development community collaboratively in an iterative process. Keep testing, iterating, try again, get it right, finding the gray areas and around the edges and trying to fix those through a continuous process is kind of the deal. This is really cool stuff because the idea is let's keep working at it and keep bumping along until, refine until we're there. Open to all participants. There's no cost to participate in Argonaut. Anyone can join as an observer, essentially, but also you can join as a participant. There is funding that has been provided by the core founding members because there are people who are managing and controlling all this who need some funding. but it's been but pretty much it's been a self-funded organization, and it's primarily a volunteers and resources contributed by the provider organization. It's not an organization. It really is a truly non-competitive environment. Everyone's working together. It's interesting to see the major EHR vendors working side by side, comparing the results from their API. That's not something they do in the marketplace as a general rule, my understanding, but it really makes a big difference. I mean, they're partners in this whole activity. They all recognize the importance of that. We have to get this right. Some of the things that they are doing, contributing a lot by going through the details of the FHIR specification. Now, as I'll show you in a bit, they're not going through everything. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world of FHIR, and they're focused on a pretty narrow window, which is around the data access to the, I don't know if it's 20 or so core meaningful use data elements that are in place, which correspond to FHIR resources. And it's read-only for the most part in what they've been doing. FHIR does a lot more than read-only. But they're focused on this piece, and again, it's a very, very important piece, and getting the common understanding of what the content of FHIR resources are really important. That's one of the key areas they're exploring. Supporting the community of FHIR implementers. Their goal is specifically to create implementation guides that really try to disambiguate the activity of how you apply a very broad general purpose resource tool like FHIR to do specific activities. So as I said, the first one is querying the common MU data set is what they've been mostly focused on. CCDA, the common provider directory problem, and also going through security and authorization testing and evaluating these so that these things can be handled in a consistent way across all the FHIR implementation community. They're doing conformance testing and making published results. Everything is transparent and clear, available. You can certainly check into Argonaut on the Argonaut Wiki, which is off the HL7 wiki. I think it's wiki.hl7.argonaut.com. And then continuous improvement through sprints. So sprint cycle falls out of the agile programming development methods. It's the sprints, they follow a 2-week sprint cycle where they go through a list of things, they test these things, and then start another sprint in the next 2 weeks. Some of that might be things that needed further work from the previous one. Other things will be new areas that go along. So it's a very energetic activity. We had a little wiki performance problems this week, and boy, instantaneously you get constant messages saying, hey, what's going on? Get me my wiki, you know. So, there's a lot going on these guys, because a 2-week cycle is pretty short to be actually going through delivering and producing results. And so this shows you the level of energy and commitment that's involved here. The common data set, here we are with the common clinical data set from the 2015 Meaningful Use Edition. Can't read this, but I think you get a copy, you can access them. The ones in red are the ones from the long list of available FHIR resources, and actually this list is extended since this was published. But you see it's about 20 or so of the core resources that are tied in. There's a lot of other things that are going on in the FHIR world that they're not exploring right now. As I mentioned, they're not dealing with data updates so much. There are workflow activities. There are a lot of specifics that are not being addressed yet. But this common basis of identifying information, of being able to collect information about a patient, about procedures and medications, about problems and observations, this is at the core of everything. And so, the Argonaut Project, I believe, intends to continue onward and slowly build and expand to other things. But that core is what we want to get nailed down for this first normative release. Some of the work they do is they're building, again, this is just taken from the wiki, so you can go and find this if you want to actually read it. But they're looking at specific profiling of the resources. When we say profiling in the FHIR work, in the FHIR world, we're talking about these sort of broad resources which describe the various components of a certain area of information. But the profiles sort of are the details of how you use it for a specific purpose. So they're dealing with terminology binding and value sets that would be associated with it, and specific scenarios when they'd be used. And so these profiles basically tell you how to apply the resources to do something. And then these profiles are combined into implementation guides, which are somewhat broader. And so what Argonaut is doing is refining the profile development for these core API uses and producing implementation guides that will make it pretty clear so that people can implement security and authorization, et cetera, in a common way across organizations. This, again, another Mickey's architectural slide. Jeff mentioned the use of OAuth. It's actually OAuth 2, the protocol for authorization, and the OpenID Connect method, the way that they currently, and this approach was designed by the Smart on FHIR activity, principally. It's intended to work both within the enterprise so that it's accessible, through an internal server, but also between enterprises, and also dealing with the fact of information that can be run on mobile apps as well as within browsers. This is the current state of the current iteration of the implementation program. They're trying to narrow down, consistent with the Ballot cycle within FRSTU3 of FHIR. And these are the facts. I guess looks like they're down into, where are we, 4th row down at this point. You can just see basically that they're going through a series of the resources. This is not the first time they've been through these. There have been modifications and refinements as they've gone through these previous times before. But again, basically these 2-week cycles, going through a series and then moving on to the next and fixing whatever was left over along the way, looking to resolve this entire cycle by the end of September, right after our working group meeting in Baltimore. So, summing up from Argonaut and adapted again from Mickey's slides. It has actually helped improve the speed of FHIR development by, basically uncovering a lot of the ambiguities and shortcomings. And they're able to move very quickly in these 2-week sprint cycle. That's kind of unprecedented historically, certainly in the world of traditional HL7 applications. It's typically a long implementation cycle. The reality in the FHIR world is people put up apps in a day, They're pretty easy to get going, but again, setting up a prototype app and actually testing, implementing in production is a bigger deal than it is. But they're actually helping by going through this iterative process, getting a lot of different organizations to bang on it from different perspectives, really increasing the robustness of what's being produced. Competitors are very willing to interoperate, to collaborate for interoperability. The people on board, there's a real strong sense of commitment to the FHIR vision within the community. And people are really take it seriously that if anything comes up, boy, they come up. No, this is important, and they believe it. And again, that level of commitment, passion, and belief really not something you see in the data standards world historically. Foundation is in place, but there's a lot more work to be done. We really narrow down as to all that FHIR's done and what they've done now. They're looking at things like they need to do more work on specifying how do you handle search parameters, and granularity is a common problem that happens within the community. How deep do we get? And so that's a constantly challenge for pretty much everything that's going on within the community. Rapid increase in market demand. And I think we've mentioned most of these things, but the ONC calls for patient apps being most recent with the competition that ONC has funded. And there's a lot of work to be done. When we talk about getting from here to where we need to be, it's this whole sense of all the aspects of the market ecosystem, which is a whole lot about policy, maybe more than technology. The contracting terms and arrangements, the intellectual property. FHIR is open to all, but applications with it, not necessarily every FHIR application is going to be open source. Safety and contracts, and so there's a lot of work to be done in terms of doing this. These are the sort of things that tend to happen over a decade historically, and in the world of FHIR, they're happening very, very rapidly. You can get to, from the FHIR from the Argonaut Wiki, you can get to links to all of the key details. I included these in your slides, but I just cut them from the PDF, so I don't think they're live. So you'll have to type the darn things in when you do. Okay, so Connectathons. I don't have any slides on Connectathons. How many of you have participated in a FHIR Connectathon? Okay, so there you go. So you guys know more than me. I've observed a couple of them since I've been there. Connectathons are tacked up to the beginning of HL7 working groups. They're a 2-day meeting when groups are put together to come together in one big room, and they set up tables much like this, and the tables are organized around specific topics. And the idea is they get the different groups to work together and explore a scenario that's been predefined. and to basically test it interactively until they make it work, and then everyone reports nicely on them at the end. It's a very busy community organization when people roll up their sleeves and are digging away. Similar to IHE Connectathons, if you've been to one of those as well. But, you know, we've got lots of different groups organized around topic. There's our, let's see, we have a pointer. There's Graham over there in the corner there. You can see him. He's very wide. Takes a lot of space, but he's amazingly at the middle of all of these things. But he's not the only one. There's a huge group of the core developers who are actively involved in running between table and table. And they do a number of different tracks that they explore. So this is from the May Connectathon. Actually, right now, I think next Wednesday is the deadline for the tracks for the Baltimore one. And so if you see the types of things they're exploring, there's I can't quite read them myself. There's a CCDA on FHIR. The stuff that Argonaut's doing fits pretty much into the data access framework, DAF. This is the kind of the key API functionality that's at the bottom of that first column over there. There's a very impressive active group on the clinical genomics side that's been working, and they sort of just started kind of late, but boy, they've been like sort of the stars of the group in terms of what they've been able to produce and how fast they've moved to put things together. The patient track is kind of at the middle of everything. Everyone needs patients pretty much on their applications. Another one that's been pretty active right now is the workflow track. They've been trying to work that out for STU3 as well. So you can see these on the FHIR website, FHIR Wiki. You can get to FHIR from the HO7 website. There's a big box in the middle of the home page. You can click on it. It'll take you to the HO7 FHIR page, and from there you can get to the wiki where you can look up these things in more detail. But tracks enrollment's going on right now for the Baltimore Connectathon. Another thing that we brought up is Viet here. There he is. He's been one of the leaders of the Clinicians on FHIR Act. This is my slide I put together based on your input. I actually was exposed to this kind of late at the very last day in Montreal in May, and I thought it was super cool. You know, so it's like a connectathon in that we got tables, but in this case we got tables of clinicians working side by side with developers. And what they've been trying to do is, this is sort of a grassroots operation to make FHIR real for the clinical community. And so they're sitting down, they sit down together, and they're basically going through a tool that was developed by David Hay, who's one of the active FHIR core team and another Australian. Built a tool called clingfire. And the tool allows the clinicians to actually build a resource instance as if they were seeing a patient, just to get this idea of how FHIR represents information, as well as to do some profiling for specific use cases they're doing. It's another source of providing input from the clinical community. Historically, in the world of data standards, getting the clinical direct input's been kind of challenging. You know, it's the standards developers and the engineers who do a lot of things. FHIR is different because, you know, it's really hard for the clinical community to understand, for example, the RIM and V3. They get resources. They can understand. You're talking about things like a patient and a procedure, and they get that stuff. And, but the devil's in the details. And so by getting direct clinical input, working with these, again, trying to improve the definitions, improve the representations, eliminate gray areas and consistency. So the idea is getting clinicians more directly involved in this activity, which again will lead to a more robust solution. And this is a screenshot from the clingfire tool. You can look at that too. It's another public open source tool, clingfire.org or .com, yeah. Is it org? Yeah, all right, one or the other. You can figure it out. Just search clingfire. Spell it right, you got it. And it sort of actually talks to you. The tool is pretty cool. I mean, the bottom here, we just have a list of what people are looking at based on the various different areas. I can't read it again. Maybe you can, but it's screen. But which area, which set of resources they're working from. And yeah, it's pretty cool. I've tried it myself. It looks pretty neat. I'm going to actually hopefully get people at FDA to start doing this before too long. So yeah, clingfire. I should have mentioned about connectathons. There's only 3 a year with our working groups, but there's actually lots of others. There was one in China 2 or 3 weeks ago that Graham was at. There's one in Amsterdam in November for Europe. There's going to be more too, because we actually, it doesn't have to be just the one that's associated with the maturity model and the specification itself. Connectathons are about making it easy for people to actually use FHIR to do things, and I'll even put the gauntlet down. Hey, next one. Next MiHIN, maybe, maybe you guys want to actually do that. Seems to be enough activity to be looking at that. Getting close to the end, you know, as Jeff indicated, you know, as we've said, there's a lot to be done to actually make FHIR achieve the HL7 vision of making healthcare information interoperable and being able to be accessible to the right people at the right time to improve public health. And so one of the activities that HL7 has put together is a series of meetings called Partners in Interoperability. We had one in Washington in April. Our next one is October, hopefully at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. I don't think we've nailed down the space yet. And what this is more of a senior executive type planning meeting. What do we need to do to make this stuff actually work? And so the way it was divided currently among 3 tracks, one for clinicians, one for payers, and one for biopharma, groups that haven't been traditionally deeply involved in the development of healthcare interoperability data standards. What the target was trying to identify the requirements, the use cases, and the obstacles that would prevent us from moving forward. And again, lots of interesting dialogue, lots of concrete action items about getting everyone working together to move this on. Partners in Interoperability, that is open. I think it's open to all when we do that. But we're looking at senior, mostly senior, that's aimed towards senior executives. It's not a connectathon, no hacking, no developing, purely policy, planning, management, change management. By our count, we know of more than 200 organizations who have apps or are developing apps. I was at a meeting Wednesday with people from the Hackensack University Medical Center, and they had 23 FHIR apps they were currently using internally already, internally and with the patient community. So lots of organizations who are involved using FHIR, and most people don't realize that because it's been identified as a draft standard, and well, it's not been released normative production mode yet. But that hasn't stopped people from using it. The Smart on FHIR apps have been installed very many places. So we put together this meeting called the Applications Roundtable. It'll be held at Harvard Medical School in July. And it's going to be kind of a fun showcase. We've invited presentations. We're going to give out awards for the best of show or best of certain types of apps. But the idea is just to give people a sense of the breadth and depth of things that are already out there currently using FHIR, and give people a chance to talk to each other, talk to people who've developed apps, different organizations, how they've gotten around it. A lot of room at the Harvard Medical School. So welcome and come. It's a very inexpensive meeting. It's all about but it's really about giving people a sense that this stuff is real, it can be done, and you can do it too, honestly. Lastly, I wanted to mention was another new organization. There's so much of these things going on. That's every time Chuck goes somewhere, he comes back with a new one too. So need an app for that. The FHIR Foundation is a new nonprofit. We've applied for 501c3. It's actually a Michigan nonprofit. We've applied for a 501c3 certification from the IRS as a charitable institution. The reason we put the foundation together is that we wanted to get a true nonprofit consistent with the, charitable nonprofit consistent with the FHIR open source policy that can really attract resources and be sort of a center of the FHIR community. Some of the things it's going to be doing is supporting implementation with education and tools, similar to which we've been doing through HL7, but much broader. But another key part that's really important that we're needing to fund is development of a FHIR registry, which will be able to keep track of all these localizations and extensions and the various things that are in place. And Linnell's nodding here. It's very important to the payer community to be able to track these things, the status of various things. And so we're looking to build some infrastructure to support the global FHIR community and implementation. We haven't quite worked out the business model yet for the group, but it is a charitable institution, so we're looking for grants, and possibly it'll be more of an individually member group. It won't be the same thing as HL7, but it's really going to focus specifically on supporting the global adoption and implementation of FHIR. In terms of what's next on the list for FHIR coming forward, So the STU3 ballot, which people are working to stabilize right now, needs to be locked down. That will be, sign up for that will be open on July 27th, where you can, in the HL7 process, you have to be an HL7 member to ballot, but in the HL7 process, you can opt into the ballot poll beginning on that day. And a lot of refinements and additions to resources, as well as workflow being one of the other key areas for the STU3 ballot. And this is intended to be the last ballot before the normative edition that we're looking to develop next year. The next Baltimore Connectathon, September 17th, and the Inner Harbor in Baltimore before the HL7 working group meeting. FHIR needs resources. They need people to participate in the community. Graham's always asking, just give me more people. There's no end of things to do. But we need people. So once you get trained today, come and join. No cost to that other than your time. But I think if you've been in the software world, we're doing this sort of thing for years, and I assume most of you have, you're gonna have a lot of fun. It's a different world. I mean, it's just people love doing it. That's why they're doing it almost 24 hours a day, it seems. There's a new product roadmap being put together. Again, FHIR has been moving so quickly, it's kind of hard to necessarily tell what happens next, and there's so many moving parts and so many parallel ways that put together a graphical visual roadmap to give a better indication of what the plan is, and Graham's recruited some new people to help with that. I think that might be one of those too. Are you on the roadmap thing? Yeah, I think you were, yeah. So, one of the things we're looking at, we've talked about JSON and XML as the two implementation languages for FHIR. A lot of interest in using RDF, semantic web technologies, to represent FHIR, but RDF implied with it a need to have a more of an ontological representation of FHIR. So there's work on those things going on. I think the RDF place, I sat at a meeting last week, and Graham seemed to have that pretty much ready to go, but not ready to release yet, but it actually can represent content, FHIR content in RDF format. There's a new standard for mapping and querying called FluentPath. Actually, this was an HL7 standard. It's been somewhat developed in parallel with FHIR, but that'll be coming out as part of the FHIR specification as well, coming forward. That'll be going to ballot this summer as well. New resources for clinical decision support, bringing information at the point of care to support evidence-based medicine activities. That's part of the STU3, and work onward to beyond that. There's a lot of interest in that. That's one of the big value use cases for FHIR. And then there's been an activity with CIMI, the Clinical Information Modeling Initiative, is led by Stan Huff, our long-term board member and chair several times. And CIMI's developed logical models representing sort of sets of information related to observation. So it's not just think of it as LOINC plus, I think. I try to think of it that way, but describing a logical model representing an item of information that really nails down which terminology bindings, which additional attributes uniquely and distinctively characterizes specific types of observation. That activity has been going on for a couple of years, and rolling it into the FHIR spec so that the CIMI models can be applied, one of the remaining activities to work for. Mentioned the normative edition, shooting for spring of 2007. It seems awfully close. I don't know if it'll be next year. We'll see where we go at once we get past this ballot. But I think that's probably spring of 2017. Sounds like the April 2017 ballot's the target there. So be working on that. And last thing, just lots of stuff going on around FHIR, not all of it by HL7. There are a couple of things online that are interesting. The FHIR for Executives webinar series, I've actually watched that one from Lloyd McKenzie does that. There's a more technical one, architectural approaches for series, and so you can get into a little more depth. I think you get an hour today working on the hands-on things. You might want to do a little more. Worth looking at. Again, online course session led by FHIR developers. There's an activity going on in Chicago in July for payers. It's basically at our last partners meeting, the payers got all excited and pumped up and wanted to dig in a whole lot deeper, so we scheduled them a special meeting that will be at AHIP, I think, in Chicago. There's also, and they're doing a virtual Connectathon right after that, so they better get something done, Linnell. You have to show them afterwards, right? Applications Roundtable I mentioned in July, and there's a detailed fundamentals course coming up in August. The HL7 meeting comes up in September, and it just comes on and on. So this is just what's going on the next 2 months. And I believe that's my last slide. I have 30 seconds for questions because you know I wouldn't be able to answer any. But if you have one, I'm happy to take it. A question.
Hi. Given your background, are you aware of any activities that go to NCPDP to FHIR?
Well, NCPDP is active in the HL7 pharmacy work group, and we've had a long-standing relationship with them. In terms of there's interest, I'm not sure if there's been any active development. One of the things about NCPDP is they got a pretty good model going on right now. So it might make sense at some point in the future, but I'm not sure the business case is there yet. They're interested. They're looking at it, but I think they're going to need new use cases to actually justify that. So we've had participation and interest, but yeah, I'm not aware of any specific activity. Do you know of any of yet? Yeah. Yeah, and they're right. Feedback, comments, working on the resources, but in terms of actually an implementation, no, not aware of it yet. We'll keep them posted. Thank you very much.